Hello, everyone, and thanks again for joining. Today is the second of our virtual meetup series. We're really excited to have, again, a great interactive discussion today with everyone. Just a few housekeeping notes. We are trying to keep the sessions as interactive as possible. So your cameras and microphones are on. Just please mute yourself when you're not talking. Frank will kick off today's call, and then we'll get into a live Q&A. We'll also have these recorded and then posted online after, so you can watch them on demand or share with other colleagues or partners that want to view them. So now to introduce you to today's facilitator, that is Partner and President of Managecore, Frank Powell.
Thank you, Kristen, and welcome to everyone joining us today. I know it's been a challenge for everyone trying to work from home, get the logistical things in your life, trying to keep things rolling. So we'll continue with this series on another topic today. Before we jump into today's topic, which is going to be talking about the Google Cloud, we are trying to also talk about some updates or deadlines and things that are coming up. Talked a little bit about this on Tuesday, but thought I'd mention it again just because they are relevant dates. So this, the first one here, where NetWeaver 7.3 and 7.4 do go out of support at the end of the year. So keep that in mind. If you're running any SAP products that are using either one of those versions, you'll want to start tackling those sooner rather than later. Same with S4 15.11. So if you were an early adopter of S4 4 years ago, just be aware that support for that expires at the end of the year as well. So you would want to start a migration project, or I should say an upgrade project to 1909 or some intermediary version of S4 if you happen to be there. And then lastly, as we talk, especially about going to the cloud, there are a lot of people that are on Windows 2008. And there's a little bit of confusion of that. So if you're running SAP or application servers on something on 2008, Microsoft says, oh, if you go to Azure, yes, that's supported. It will support that for you. However, this SAP note says something to the contrary. So anybody on SQL 2008, just be aware that you may need to do some upgrades if you're going to the cloud, or the support of that, again, ends at the end of this year. So just a couple quick notes. So today's topic, today we want to talk about running SAP on the Google Cloud. And we don't have a lot of slides. I mean, part of this was to make it more interactive and make it kind of more personal. So our intent was never to kind of do death by slides and things like that. So it is a more informal kind of discussion. But I do have some of my own personal notes that we'll be talking through. As you're aware, the Google Cloud was a little bit late to supporting SAP workloads, but now it's been 3 years, actually going on its 4th year, which is time flies when you think about it. But customers can run SAP workloads in the Google Cloud just like you could on-premise or in a private cloud or in AWS or Azure, things like that. But there's actually some very strong benefits of running SAP in Google's cloud, maybe even over on-prem or in a private cloud, and certainly over some of the other public cloud or hyperscalers that you may have been thinking about. So first of all, let's talk about a little bit about licensing. First, if you want to move any on-premise versions of SAP into a public cloud, certainly Google in this case, you can take those licenses that you're running today. It's called Bring Your Own License. And those are fully portable. A lot of people have questions. Well, if I'm going to a cloud, do I need to get SAP's cloud version of the products? And the answer is no, you don't. When you go into the Google Cloud, you're really just using the infrastructure there to run your SAP systems. So whether it be ECC or BW or SCM, again, any of those on-premise licensed products will run in the Google Cloud just fine. So licensing is not an issue. Now, versions of things, there are specific support matrix, and SAP has a few notes to talk about them, about what versions of things are supported in the Google Cloud. And the thing to note there, just kind of an overarching statement, if you're relatively current in the last couple of years, I'm sure the versions of the products you're running are supported. It's only if you're running something very old, 4, 5, 6 years or older, then it may not be supported. And then certainly there's database and operating systems that vary. For example, if you're running on an AS400, yeah, you're not going to be able to run OS400 in the cloud. Same thing with some of the legacy versions of Unix like HPUX or AIX. Having said that, Google does have some options where you can run some legacy type systems. So there are different options for those kind of things. But in general, just think if you're relatively current, you can probably move to the cloud pretty painlessly. Now, we do have several people who have inquired, well, if you're going to make that move to the cloud, do I also combine that with a HANA upgrade or a HANA migration? And whether that means just moving from a traditional relational database into HANA and doing what SAP calls suite on HANA, or upgrading all the way to S4. Some people are combining those projects into one and making that whole jump or that leap in one project. So that's certainly possible as well. Talking about just maybe some of the specifics around Google itself, one of the features that they have is something that's called live migration. And what that allows you to do is when your applications are actually running in the Google Cloud, live migration can move those workloads from one physical piece of hardware to another without interruption to your application. Now, that's not user controllable. It is controlled by the hypervisor, but think of the circumstance where a piece of hardware goes down, or Google themselves need to take a piece of hardware down to do maintenance, or they're spinning up new pieces of hardware and they want to move those workloads around. As an SAP customer, you will never incur an outage while that underlying maintenance is being done. So something very unique to Google. And then related to the live migration is also Google's commitment to virtualization. So especially when you think about HANA, there are different, obviously, sizes of HANA databases, 1 terabyte, 4 terabyte, 8 terabyte, 12, 16, 18, and now 24 terabyte HANA systems out there. One of the differentiators of Google is also that they have a strong commitment to virtualization across all of their HANA systems. So if you want a 12 terabyte HANA system in Google, that's virtualized. In some of the other clouds, it may not be virtualized, and those cloud vendors, even though it's a cloud solution, you actually might be sitting on physical hardware or what they call bare metal infrastructure. So on the surface, sometimes people say, oh, I'm running my HANA system in the cloud, but it's on bare metal, so it's my own server, and that sounds good on the surface, but if you're running on bare metal, you've kind of lost all the value of being in the cloud and having this virtualized layer. Because things like live migration, you can't automatically migrate a workload if it's on a bare metal server, for example, right? So Google's adherence to virtualization allows them to do things like live migration regardless of the size platform that you're running. So that's a big differentiator themselves. So both live migration and adherence to virtualization kind of across the board for all their platforms. Another item specific to SAP is Google has adopted a backup strategy and included direct integration into backend. And backend, if you're an SAP basis person, you probably are familiar with what that is. If you're not, backend is SAP's integration to backup tools. So when you back up your database, backend is the interface into things like, net backup or any other type of backup product. Well, Google integrated backend into what they call cloud storage, which is kind of the media to where you would back up your SAP systems. So what that allows a Google customer to do is back up their database directly into cloud storage, which is the lower cost, kind of long retention type storage. In other providers, the difference is you need to back those databases up to persistent disk, more expensive disk, and then as a second step, then you migrate it into their cloud storage. So what that equates to is a longer runtime for backup because it's a two-step process. And it also means you have to have more persistent disk allocated just to store the backups through that interim step. So the way Google has actually implemented this, it's lower cost, and additionally, it's faster. So again, a big benefit of Google, again, running SAP in a Google environment versus maybe one of other cloud providers. The next thing I want to talk about is the pricing model of Google, because this is where kind of the rubber hits the road for me. And for those of you who've had any cloud experiences in the past, we've talked to customers that were early adopters of the cloud, maybe not even running SAP, but they try to put workloads out there 4, 5, 6 years ago, and many of them, their initial impression was, wow, we thought we were going to save money in the cloud, and it ended up being way more expensive than we had planned. And in talking to those customers, what we realized is, many of them didn't take advantage of the pricing models that are out there, and I'll talk about those in a minute, or they tried to configure their systems just like they would have if they were on premise, which inherently means they over provisioned infrastructure that they didn't need, or they looked at the systems and I call it the path of least resistance. So they try to make it very easy and flexible, and again, not leveraging the power of the cloud, again with the on-premise mentality, which resulted in them spending a lot more money than they needed to. So those were some issues, just I think, with poor implementations. But it also relates to the pricing model. And Google's pricing model is unique in the industry because they don't make you pre-buy capacity. They don't make you provision more than you need. You basically truly is a pay-as-you-go infrastructure pricing model. So what does that mean? Effectively, when you buy a bunch of infrastructure in the cloud, and again, at its base level, all the hypervisors work the same. So meaning, let's say you buy, 4, virtual machines, and you're going to run them for a long time, and most SAP customers are going to leave their systems there for years. So each of the hyperscalers do have pricing models where if you commit to 3 years, you get a better discount for committing that workload for 3 years. The difference being is, what does that commitment tie you to? And in Google's case, all they are asking you to do is commit to using a certain amount of memory and CPU. It doesn't matter if that means it's 5 virtual machines or 50 virtual machines. You've just committed yourself to a certain amount of CPU and memory. What that also means is you can change over time. So if you started out with 50 little servers and your business changed, now you need 20 large servers, doesn't matter. You can change on the fly. And again, you've just committed to CPU and memory. Contrary to that, if you look at some of the other vendors, Azure, for example, to get that commitment and that 3-year pricing model, you need to pay most of that up front. So instead of having an operating expense month to month, now you have a big capital expense that you have to offset that payment to get those discounts. So that's one downside of Azure as an example. In the case of AWS, when you buy a virtual machine, you're actually buying that virtual machine. So if you decide, 6 months or business requirements changed in 6 months and you need to change the size of that virtual machine, yes, you can use a different one, but you've already purchased the first one. So if you needed, and let's use HANA as an example. In that example, if I bought a 1 terabyte HANA system, and in 6 months I outgrow it, and I decide I want a 2 terabyte system, in the Azure model, you own the one for 3 years. So if you need the 2 terabyte one, you can buy the additional 2 terabytes, but now effectively you're paying for 3 terabytes. And they have an open market system where you can actually try to sell the 1 terabyte to another Azure customer and things like that, but that becomes cumbersome, right? And what amounts to is now people are actually going out and they're buying the 2 terabyte system ahead of time because they're understanding that they don't want to get in this commitment problem with AWS. So once again, you're over purchasing capacity, which again completely defeats the purpose of why people go to the cloud in the first place. So we go back to this concept of the Google pricing model where you're committing just to CPU and memory volumes. And in the same scenario, let's say you bought the 1 terabyte appliance and you outgrow it. In the Google world, I've only committed to 1 terabyte. So if I need 2, you can just simply commit to the extra 1 terabyte. And again, you're only paying for what you need. Or maybe you only need that for a certain amount of time. Again, think of those two pricing or the models we just kind of talked through. The same situation can occur if I need to burst my workload for a busy season. Maybe you have a cyclical business where for 3 months out of the year, you need that 2 terabyte appliance, but for the other 9 months, you only need a 1 terabyte appliance. Again, on the Google model, all I would do is pay the incremental cost of the 1 to the 2 terabyte for 3 months. And when I turn it off, I'm still getting that 3-year committed price on the 1 terabyte and will for the duration of that period. But again, in the other clouds, you're actually going to be paying for 3 terabytes to do use that same scenario in a temporary model. So the pricing model, again, in the Google world is extremely flexible. And this is where, when people have explained to us, well, geez, we put some workloads in AWS or Azure, and they turn out to be really expensive. We always talk about the Google pricing model and how it's different. And we did this, use those same scenarios, walk through that pricing model with them, and show them how they truly would save more money over the same 3-year period with varying, capacity needs and things like that. And just as a few more SAP examples, one of the things that Managecore is doing in support of our customers, because of that flexible pricing model, every customer that runs SAP, whether it be monthly or quarterly or a couple times a year, people do refreshes, right? So you refresh your QA system with a copy of production. Well, we've started doing, and again, people want that QA refresh done in as short a period of time as they can, right? Sometimes depending upon your configuration, it might take 3 weeks, or 3 days, or up to a week to do a QA refresh. Well, because a lot of it's runtime of certain applications inside of SAP, what the Managecore team has started doing is, when we do that QA refresh, we use a really large virtual machine for QA to process that refresh as quickly as possible just for that one day. And then we back down the memory requirements, the CPU requirements to the standard needs. So what we've done is given a lot of horsepower to that system for the one day we need it. And under the Google pricing model, that amounts to a couple $100 of that incremental cost for one day, right? So taking advantage of that and thinking about how these things can impact the day-to-day operation of an SAP environment really has a big impact. So just another example there. So those are just a couple things. Just one more quick one I'd talk about is, Google has this thing called multi-regional cloud storage. So kind of, if you think about disaster recovery from that perspective, the idea of going to tape and things like that is kind of a thing of the past. But when you run backups, and I mentioned earlier that backend allows you to run backups from your database directly into cloud storage. Well, if we use multi-regional cloud storage, what multi-regional cloud storage is, that storage is available in every region in North America, for example. So if your systems are using like US Central 1 as the region where your productive systems are hosted, and we back them up to multi-regional cloud storage, from a DR perspective, we could log into the East region and restore those systems right from there, because that storage is replicated to every region. And again, it's very inexpensive storage. So if you think about what your DR plan might look like today, and for SAP customers, and there's a lot of customers still today that their backup process, their disaster recovery process is still backing up the tape. And for a DR test, they take those tapes, they fly them to some faraway data center, they try to restore them via tape, bring all the systems up, get network connectivity working, and they try to do that within a 24-hour period, and sometimes it works, most times it doesn't. If you take that old scenario and adapt it to now running in the cloud using Google's multi-regional cloud storage, you can do a complete DR test and never leave your desk. Bring it up, configure it, start it, have users test it literally within minutes, which is a complete game changer. So just another scenario where not only the power of Google, but the power of the cloud that lets you do things today that 10 years ago weren't possible, certainly in the time frames with the flexibility and the pricing that you can do them today. So just a quick couple of thoughts today on the Google Cloud. Kind of concludes some of the topics. So I would, if anybody has any questions, happy to answer them. And there's actually a lot more we could talk about, but again, in the 15 or 20 minutes that we gave ourselves today, kind of limited what we wanted to cover, but happy to answer any other questions if anybody had any at the moment.
Cool. Thanks, Frank.
Hey, Frank,
Yeah.
This is Carl. Some of the questions that do come up, and maybe this is something you can address, but managed services as it obtains to the Google Cloud, how does that help optimize that? I mean, how what do we do that maybe some of the on-prem people they can't do, and how do we take advantage of that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So when you move to the cloud, and I'll take that in comparison to an on-premise environment, right? So if you're running SAP on-prem today, Not only do you have an SAP basis team that's managing SAP, but more than likely you have an infrastructure team, right? And those are the people that are turning on the servers or uncreating them, putting them in the data center, getting the networks configured and all that kind of thing. When you go to the cloud, that job function, meaning of the infrastructure, still exists, right? But now it's very different, right? You're no longer unboxing hardware and standing it up and racking it and things like that. Now we're spinning up virtual machines and we're configuring the network on the fly. So the job and that function still exists, but it's different. It's now kind of point and click, but you still have to understand, how that's done. So what Managecore has done is, instead of trying to create a completely separate team that manages infrastructure, we have cross-trained our SAP basis team to learn how to do the Google infrastructure configuration and manage it. So what we have found is our I'll call it time to resolution, or completing a task, has increased dramatically from the point of, let's use the DR example, right? We do a DR test and our basis team can run the backups into cloud storage, log into the other region, recover that backup from cloud storage, start it up, test it without any other support or help from an infrastructure team or another party. And what we found is, because all of those, when you go from one team to the next team to the next, in a traditional IT environment, all of that takes time, right? You're submitting a request to another team who then has to, answer the request, do the work, things like that. And that slows down progress. So what we've tried to do is streamline the process of support from our team members, and cross-train them in all of those technologies to speed those processes up. And just a real quick thing is, the very first customer we put into the Google Cloud was a company called FFF about 2 years ago. And when we put them in, it was our first customer that we'd ever put in the cloud. And one of the things obviously we were testing was DR, ironically. And when we did those tests, our team internally, we did something like 37 DR tests in 2 days, meaning we started with a clean slate and tried to recover those systems. And we were doing things like recovering from a backup of the image, recovering from a live backup of the database, recovering from just a backup of the database, all these different scenarios, see how they worked. And our internal teams, Carl, they were amazed that they said, if we were trying to do that on an on-premise in a traditional data center environment, trying to do 37 backup tests and recovery tests for DR could have taken months. And we did that in 2 days, right? You try one, it doesn't work, you delete it, you start over, So that's just an example of the power of the cloud and the power of Google that we've already seen and am demonstrating to our customers every day. So, but thanks for the question.
Yeah, that was a great question.
Yeah.
I know one other question that comes up in a lot of conversations that I have with customers is, what type of companies are typically going to the Google Cloud? What are we seeing? I know we have customers live today, but just to kind of get a gauge of that perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kristen, it's kind of all across the board, honestly. For us, though, and this is the sampling of just Managecore, it almost feels like people that are or SAP customers that are in some other hosting solution today, meaning they're in a private cloud, they're in a colo, maybe they're in, I'll say, SAP's HEC solution, where they feel they don't have the flexibility, they don't have the speed of change that they want. They generally feel they're paying too much. Those customers seem to really be looking for an alternative. So I think that's maybe our most common type of customer today. Now, across industries, we have customers in all sorts of industries, right? Certainly manufacturing. We have quite a few in the pharmaceutical, biotech kind of world. Some in oil and gas. Kind of all across the board from that perspective. But those are really looking for answers today. Now, as time progresses, I think we'll see more people who are just traditional running SAP on-prem will be doing that same thing and looking for cloud-based solutions, again, because of the flexibility, the cost savings that can be occurred, and other things. So yeah, but thanks. Another good question.
Great.
Yeah. But I see we're kind of rolling up on our half hour here. So, yep. But again, thank you very much. Hope this was informative. If anybody has any questions, feel free, you can submit them either online or shoot us an email. We're happy to answer them.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a reminder too, our next session is on Tuesday, and we're going to be talking about managed service providers and what you should be expecting from your MSP, in particular with transparency, basis automation tools. So it should be another really great discussion to make sure that we're delivering the most to our customers and customers are getting the most from their MSP. So be sure to join that one as well.
Great.
Thanks,
Thanks
Frank.
everyone.
Thank you,
Have a great
guys.
day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.